Now and okay. Welcome everyone once again to the March lecture in our series of monthly lectures for the Friends of Frontenac Park. We started these as a way to engage with our members and volunteers in the absence of being able to meet face to face, and it's been going about a year now. So we've had a very wide range of different kinds of talks and a very good reception from our membership for them. So welcome to this month's presentation. Our speaker this evening is Colin Chapman, and he's going to speak on hunting for rare lichens, common threads between Atlantic Canada and the Frontenac area. Colin's a consulting biologist. He's based in Eastern Ontario, though has moved here recently from New Brunswick. The last 4 years, he's worked as a botanist and lichenologist with the Atlantic Canada Conservation Data Centre. Colin says that through his work in natural areas, he's covered biological inventories and species risk surveys, and he's documented over 8,000 rare species locations and discovered more than 30 firsts for the provinces in records of plants and lichens. He's also lead author of the Illustrated Flora of Prince Edward Island. And I will mention, as I see people are on the line, when I first came to Canada back in the late 80s, I worked with Colin's grandparents on the board of the Kingston Field Naturalists, and know the family well. And Colin's grandparents, his aunt, his father are also on the phone tonight. So welcome everybody, and thanks again for joining.
And I'm going to try to draw some parallels between Atlantic Canada and Eastern Ontario. So let's get to it. There we go. Okay. So I'll just give you a little more detail about my role. I was with the Atlantic Canada Conservation Data Centre. They're a member of NatureServe Canada, an equivalent organization to the Ontario Natural Heritage Information Centre. So in Atlantic Canada, the ACCDC is widely regarded as the go-to for data on rare species and biodiversity in Atlantic Canada. So myself, as a botanist and lichenologist with this organization, one of the main focuses of my work was on improving our knowledge of biodiversity and of rare species in Atlantic Canada. And one way that I did this is through a really active field program. So with this really active field program, I mean, I can give you an example right here. This is from 2020, and this is, these dots are observations. So it shows you everywhere that I went in that year. And that's a fairly typical year, except for Newfoundland. We don't get there too often. But anyway, like I said, a really active field program. And what we're doing there is we're taking on projects with all sorts of partners in government, non-government organizations, industry, Indigenous organizations. And we partner with them to go out in the field and look for rare species. And we take this data back into our database and we assess and figure out, you know, which species are truly rare, which are conservation priorities, and where are they. So this can be used for a lot of things. For example, you know, it helps us determine what species are most in need of you know, scarce conservation dollars. Some other examples of the impact of our work include helping delineate new, you know, expansions of provincial parks, or highlighting properties that should be acquired by a nature trust. I've actually done quite a bit of work with local nature trusts, the Nature Conservancy of Canada, Environment Canada, doing work such as natural area inventories or rare species searches on nature preserves or properties. And, you know, some goals of these include, of course, you know, documenting everything that they're protecting, but also looking for rare species and sensitive features that we can highlight for them that might need specific management. Okay. So we're talking about conservation, and increasingly in conservation these days, lichens are getting a big focus. And rightfully so. Lichens can be very informative about the habitat in which they grow. You may have heard that lichens are very picky. A lot of them can be very picky, you know. They can be very sensitive to air pollution, like sulfur dioxide. They can be very sensitive to humidity levels, so, you know, local microclimates. They're sensitive to forestry often. So depending on which species you see, if you know about its life history, it can tell you a lot about, you know, about how humid the site might be. It can tell you a lot about whether there's been disturbance or selective harvesting in there. It can tell you, you know, about the age of the community or the tree that it's on. And of course, many of them are very rare. So it's really an interesting group to look into. Really vital for conservation. This one pictured here actually is probably Atlantic Canada's rarest lichen, or most at-risk lichen anyway, the boreal felt lichen. This one is extremely rare. It's only found in really, really good humid swamps that are old, and it only grows on balsam fir. So it's threatened by logging, as well as increased temperatures from climate change. And if you look right here, if you see these kind of white spots here, if all that wasn't enough, wasn't too much, well, it's also at risk from snails, which you can see graze upon the lichen, and they eat it here, and that eventually also leads to mortality. So generally, if you see that lichen, you know you're in a wonderful spot, but the snails are a real problem too. So I'll just give a little bit of background on what a lichen actually is. I think a lot of the time when you hear about lichens, you know, people say how they're a symbiosis between an algae and a fungus. And that's true. They are a major symbiosis between algae and fungi. But when we're talking about the lichen species, the species unit is actually the lichen fungus, the lichenizing fungus. That is what's unique to the species. There are many algae that actually associate with different lichen species, but it's always the fungus that is the individual species. So in general, we can divide lichens into two groups based on the type of photosynthesizing partner. Chlorolichens are generally lichenizing fungus with a green alga. And then you have cyanolichens, which are the fungus in partnership with the cyanobacterium. Now, cyanolichens are often more sensitive to pollution, like cyanobacteria, and as a result are more rare. Boreal felt lichen actually is an example of an exceptionally pollution-sensitive cyanolichen. So a lot of my work focuses on finding cyanolichens. All right, let's see. Just a little more basics around lichens. A lot of them can be, you know, artificially divided into useful groups based on their rough shape and size. You know, there's an amazing diversity of lichens, of lichen forms, but a lot of them can fit into these groups. There's obviously intermediates, but one of them is, we call them leafy or foliose lichens. So they're like this lungwort right here. You can see a slug actually eating it. Yeah, so this is tree lungwort, Lobelia pulmonaria. We call it foliose because it kind of looks leafy. It's more or less flat with an upper and lower surface. Then you have fruticose lichens, like these reindeer lichens in the genus Cladonia. How many species do you think are here? I think there's at least 4 that I see offhand anyway. So fruticose lichens are 3D, often branched, and they have structures often, in this case, called podetia. And then, of course, one of the quite understudied and maybe one of the most diverse groups of lichens are the crustose lichens, right here. And crustose lichens or crust lichens, they're often a lot more difficult to study because there's less to go on, because they grow tightly adhered to their surfaces, like rocks, soil, bark. Sometimes they even grow within the bark, within the rocks. So it's just, there's not a lot to go on, and you have to focus on characters of the fruiting bodies, the apothecia, by slicing them very thinly and looking at them under a compound microscope. But there's an amazing diversity, and it's a really understudied group. Now, if you really want to go down the rabbit hole, there's a subset of crusts called stubble lichens. As you can see right here, they look like nothing more than stubble, just emerging from heartwood, exposed heartwood of trees, bark, or twigs sometimes. This one is actually a nice example. This is frosted glass whiskers. You can see the little pink, the pink masses of spores at the end of a little stalk here. That's one thing that distinguishes this species. You actually have to also look at that under a compound microscope. And if you look at it, the stalk has a red core with a kind of translucent sheath. So this is frosted glass whiskers. This is actually a federally protected species at risk. It's previously was only known from Atlantic Canada, and this was actually, it was previously only known from Nova Scotia. And this is actually a photo from where I found it on Prince Edward Island, and that was the first record for the province. So always nice to get a new species for the province, especially when it's something as important as a species at risk. And it just goes to show that there's a lot to learn out there with lichens. You need to get people out there looking for more. So, as I mentioned earlier, lichens are, excuse me. Lichens are very particular about their microhabitat. One big thing that really drives or contributes to lichen health is humidity, moisture. So they can dry out in periods of drought or in dry conditions. But when this happens, the algae or the cyanobacterium doesn't photosynthesize. So so the lichen isn't thriving, it's not growing. So this is why humidity, in oceanic areas or places near large bodies of water tend to have more lichens and can have more sensitive species of lichens. So this is why Atlantic Canada is actually an amazing place for lichens. There's generally different geographic patterns for the distribution of species. And one biogeographic pattern is called Great Lakes Appellation. There's a group of species that generally are distributed along the Appalachian Mountain Range, which is a place of generally high humidity. This extends northeastward into the Maritimes, where that humidity is maintained by the oceanic climate. And then, of course, a lot of these species are also in the Great Lakes area, because the Great Lakes, of course, are just such large bodies of water that it provides a similar suitable habitat for them as well. So it's these species that I'm going to try and focus on because, well, they'll be most interesting for you folks, and it's stuff that I've spent a lot of time looking for in Atlantic Canada as well. So, well, more than just pretty pictures, I'll explain this one, which won't come up later. This is wrinkled shingle lichen, another federally protected species at risk. It's quite a nice, large, distinctive one here on red maple. That's one that's only on the Atlantic coast. I've spent a lot of my work looking for this one, and it takes you to really some nice places. But I'll first get into this one. My friend and colleague, Neil here, he works at Frontenac National Park of Canada. He's actually shining a light into a brook where you can see this dark purple patch. That's actually just about our only truly aquatic species of lichen. This is called Eastern waterfan. It grows in brooks with cool water in steep shaded ravines. So Frontenac National Park is actually probably home to the biggest population of this species in the world. And we spent a lot of time going around Atlantic Canada looking for more populations of this federally threatened species of lichen. And so I'll give you some examples of some places I've been and some neat species I've found. And basically looking for Eastern waterfan here, this aquatic species, is what's taken me to the Middle River Wilderness area, for example. Such an amazing place. This is in northern Cape Breton. This was a project we were working on with the Unama'ki Institute of Natural Resources. This is an organization based out of Eskasoni, Cape Breton, and we were working with them to look for species at risk and rare species in the Bras-d'Or Lakes watershed. So, you know, pursuant to that, I got to go to the Middle River Wilderness area looking for Eastern waterfan and other rare lichens. So, so this I added this picture just to give you an example of what the habitat looked like. I was really lucky that day to have chosen, you know, a brook that no one had gone to. It looked really good from the satellite photos and from the satellite imagery, and it happened to have some nice gorges, some steep ravine walls with nice exposed rock. And I did find Eastern waterfan, but got some other things, interesting species to talk about anyway. Some other neat things I found on the rock outcrops along in this steep ravine included common stippleback lichen, Dermatocarpon miniatum, and despite its name, it's actually extremely rare in Nova Scotia. It was actually known from only one record in Nova Scotia before I found it. So this was the second for the province. Really exciting. So this is a species that's actually not aquatic. There's a sister species that is found usually near the water's edge. This one is usually found further up and generally doesn't get submerged by water. So this is one that's you can identify it by its umbilicate nature. That is, it has a single holdfast, a single area where it attaches to the rock, and that's generally in the middle of the thallus, which is the flat tissue here. So it's generally stuck to the surface in the middle, and that's one easy way to distinguish this species. Another really interesting thing I found is rock shag. I still have yet to get a look at this under the microscope. There's a couple species that look like this, but this is basically often these tiny filamentous lichens are often just filamentous cyanobacteria with really thin weaves of fungus wrapped around the filaments. And so this one, to kind of give you an idea, it was about the size of my fingernail. And that's the kind of thing we're hunting for out there. So rock shags in general are extremely rare in Nova Scotia. So it was a really great find, whatever the species is. I have yet to figure that out, but really great one. Another neat one in that area was tree pelt lichen. So tree pelt lichen is one I wanted to bring up because, well, it's rare in Nova Scotia. So that was definitely one that I was looking for. It's also extremely rare in Ontario. So that's one for you folks to keep an eye out for. Tree pelt lichen is actually pretty unique within the pelt lichen genus in our area because most pelt lichens, you're probably familiar with pelt lichens in general, most of them grow on tree bases or on rocks. Tree pelt lichen is pretty unique in that it grows on tree trunks more or less at breast height, eye heights, or even higher into the canopies. It's also got this distinct look with these granular soredia, which are asexual reproducing bodies. These are generally found along the edges of the lobes. And that's another way to distinguish the species, as well as by its pretty unique habitat. Okay, another really excellent project that I worked on recently was funded by the New Brunswick Wildlife Trust Fund. This is a project that I proposed to them. I wanted to learn more about the lichens in southern New Brunswick. There's a lot of species along southern New Brunswick's Fundy coast that are influenced by the Fundy fog. And there's a lot of species of general southern distribution that only really make it into New Brunswick in the south. So this is really somewhere that I thought needed more attention. So one of the places this brought me to was the Magadavic River. I really wish that I'd had some better photos. But anyway, this kind of gives you an idea of the really big rock outcrops that there were on the river. So naturally, that's where I wound up. And it was a great place to look for stuff. And here are some of the best finds, or the more interesting ones anyway. Here's another umbilicate lichen. Folks, you might have seen this when you're out in the woods. This is from the rock tripe genus. This is Umbilicaria americana, or frosted rock tripe lichen. You can find rock tripe lichens pretty frequently in rock faces in the forest. Usually that's Umbilicaria mammulata, which is brown. This one, Umbilicaria americana, the frosted rock tripe lichen, is distinguished by its more frosted look, among other things. And this also, it's a very large species where it's also connected to the surface with a holdfast in the center. Okay. Another group of lichens that you might be familiar with already is the rosette lichens, the Physia genus. This is a genus of lichens that is actually extremely common on street trees or trees in urban or suburban areas. Generally, a lot of them are kind of pioneer species that show up on young branches or fence posts or just about anywhere. I was really interested in finding this one, blue-gray rosette lichen, or Physia caesia, because it is not one of those species. It's actually one that has been documented pretty rarely in the Maritimes, and we just don't know enough about it to give it a conservation rank. So that was a great one to find. It grows on rock, and it's great to have this data. I was really happy to find more records of this, and it helps us understand how rare it might be. I actually should mention these S ranks here, in case you're not familiar with S ranks. These are conservation ranks. These are subnational conservation ranks that NatureServe Canada assigns for species and ecological communities. The S ranks just provide an idea of how rare or threatened a species might be, ranging from S1 being the most endangered or extremely rare to S5 being common and widespread. SU generally means unrankable because we don't have enough information, or it's a new species, something like that. Probably one of my best finds, if not my favorite find last year, was salted shell lichen, Cocklecarpia palmicola. As you can see, this one is S1 in New Brunswick. It's extremely rare in the province. It was in the province known from only 2 records, one from the 1920s, I believe, and it wasn't seen in New Brunswick since 1980, and it hadn't been found at that site since. So I was really excited to find 2 new records of the species, only the 3rd and 4th for New Brunswick. And this is another cyanolichen with a cyanobacteria partner that's actually extremely pollution sensitive too. So if we're finding this very pollution sensitive species, it's a sign that other pollution sensitive species can be around too. That the air quality locally has improved. This is also one that's very rare in Ontario, also extremely rare, S1. And it's actually known from gorges in Frontenac County. So that's one for folks to keep an eye out for. That's excellent record to see that, and one that you can identify quite easily. Some other excellent finds I had during that project include yellow-edged frost lichen. Frost lichen is a group of lichens that you may be familiar with. They get their name from this kind of frosted look that they have on the lobes. This one, well, as you can see from its name, yellow-edged, actually what distinguishes it is the yellow core. So here I removed a little bit of the upper surface, and you can see that the fungal hyphae, those are the branches, the loosely woven branches of fungus in the interior of the thallus, of the tissue, are yellow. And that was actually the first record for New Brunswick. It's one that's actually somewhat uncommon in Ontario. So I'd known it from Ontario, but it was really great to get to add that to the species list for the province. Another new species for New Brunswick that I got was a branching fringed lichen, Heterodermia galactophylla. That was really exciting to get for New Brunswick because that is just rare in all of Atlantic Canada. I think it was, prior to the last couple of years, it was only known from 1 record in all of Atlantic Canada, and that was in southern Nova Scotia. So I was really excited to find this in New Brunswick. Really nice to add this to the provincial list too. This is one that you can distinguish it by you can see the really expanded tips to the lobes that have these fine powdery granules underneath. So these are called soredia. These broad lip-shaped soredia. And then of course these fringe-like cilia coming off the edges of the lobes. So that's one to look out for in Ontario as well. It's generally rare and really good to get records of these. But it's one that is kind of difficult to distinguish from similar species. So good to have an expert take a look at photos. Another really interesting one I had was crusted tar paper lichen. This is one of those species that is really cryptic. It just looks like a black smear on tree bark. But you get up close and you have a look with your hand lens, and you can see there's actually a bunch of tiny little fruiting bodies. So yeah, they come in all shapes and sizes. It always you always want to there's often species that I look for and I think just wow, the diversity of shapes and sizes is just always amazing. I want to talk about another neat project that I did. This was another project funded by the New Brunswick Wildlife Trust Fund. So the Restigouche River is in northern New Brunswick. It forms actually the border with Quebec for much of its length, and it's one of the largest rivers in the province, and it's really interesting in terms of natural history because it has a lot of exposed calcareous bedrock, and so it supports a lot of species, a lot of rare species that require rich rich soils or calcareous rock. There's a lot of specialized species on these. You can see my colleague there on this giant outcrop. I just tried to give you an idea of the amazing features along this river. So we did a canoe trip along the Restigouche River in 2020 and saw a lot of amazing species. One of them is another palp lichen, fan palp lichen. This is pretty easily identified. This is one of the few green species, and it has these flat black fruiting bodies like that. That one's extremely rare in New Brunswick. Excellent find. Another really nice one was chalky Ramalina lichen, Ramalina labioseridiata. This one is also quite rare in the province. And you can distinguish this one by its yellowish thallus, which with these expanded soredia at the tips. And another one, I can't help but bringing up these really fun ones. Bordered scale lichen, another first record for New Brunswick. This one is actually, I believe this was the first record for Atlantic Canada, actually. So that was an excellent record to find. This is a species that requires calcareous rock too. And this is a nice one to highlight for you folks because it's also rare in Ontario. It's known from Frontenac Provincial Park. So one to keep an eye out for. It's pretty distinctive with these brown scales and red fruiting bodies. So keep an eye out for that one. So another project I worked on was looking for wetlands of special significance in Cumberland County, Nova Scotia. This is in the land bridge between New Brunswick and Nova Scotia, which is called Signigida, or also called the Chignecto Isthmus. And I just thought this was a good example or a good opportunity to show a good kind of habitat. Like I said, lichens really need high humidity. A lot of them do anyway. And so in general, you have areas like Great Lakes and the Maritimes, which have a relatively more humid climate because of the large bodies of water nearby. But then also it can be enhanced by having local humidity as well. For example, having a high water table and leaning trees often, for some reason, just happen to be really good habitat too. So I saw this tree nearly horizontal over this little brook. And so I checked it out, and lo and behold, it had some excellent species on it. One of them was blistered tar paper lichen. This is a jelly lichen. You can see that when it's wet, it's kind of translucent. This is another cyanolichen and is quite sensitive to air pollution. So that was a great find. And then even better, on this same tree, you often find great species growing together, was black foam lichen. So this is a federally threatened species, Ansia culpides. This is a federally threatened species, and part of it, we just don't quite know why we don't quite know why it keeps disappearing. It's one that we think needs some kind of disturbance. So it needs a little more light than you typically get in a forested area. So, but on top of that, it's just quite sensitive to forestry and pollution. So it's a real balance that this species needs. I bring up that species because it's actually one, black foam lichen is actually one a federally protected species of risk that's also found in Ontario. But in Ontario, it's historic, possibly extirpated. So it hasn't been seen in the province for decades, and we don't know if it's still there anymore. Historically, it's known from Eastern Ontario, so it's definitely one to keep an eye out for. So have a look for it on hardwoods, sugar maple in particular, oaks. So it's one that's fairly easy to distinguish. It's got this really thick thallus, really thick tissue with black underside. And another way that helps distinguish it is at the tips, it's got these little lobes that kind of look like fingers and fingernails. And these little black spots called pycnidia, kind of like fingernails on the little fingers that protrude at the end. So that's one to keep an eye out for. Another species at risk of lichen that is known from Eastern Ontario and is a little more common, but also quite threatened, is flooded jellyskin lichen. This is a really interesting cyanolichen that actually has a very specific habitat. It grows on tree bases, so that's that gray smear you can see right here. It grows on tree bases, generally on black ash, in swamps that tend to be inundated in the spring. So being on black ash, with emerald ash borer, the habitat is actually very threatened now. And as emerald ash borer moves through, unfortunately, it seems like we're going to lose a lot of our flooded jellyskin lichen. And hopefully not all of it, but it seems like it's in real trouble. So that's another one to keep an eye out for. There's actually a couple dozen populations in Eastern Ontario, probably the place where it's most common in the world right now. So definitely one to keep an eye out for. That's actually one that's never been found in Atlantic Canada, but it's one that I think could really be out there. It just hasn't been found yet. So that's those are some of my favorite lichen stories from Atlantic Canada, and I hope it inspires people to get out there and look for lichens as well. Their lichens are so diverse and interesting, and there's a lot of rare species that we need to conserve. So I hope this also, helps show people that they are. It's something that we really need to get out there and learn more about. This one here is gilded speckled belly lichen, something that's fairly common in Nova Scotia, but it's rare almost everywhere else. And this is a really beautiful species, pretty obvious because it has these yellow granules all around the edge and a brown thallus. So that's a really interesting one. Anyway, yeah, so like I said, I think it's really important that we get out there and document as much as we can before it's gone. So if you if you have any interest in me having a look at a certain area, definitely get in touch. I'm happy to talk about having a look for lichens in a certain area, because there's a lot more places in Ontario to have a look, and there's a lot more interesting and rare species locations to discover out here. Okay, well, I hope you enjoyed, and I hope I'll be around to answer your questions tonight. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Colin. Thank you. Simon here. I'll just switch away from the presentation and stop sharing for a minute, so I may reshare. I'll keep sharing. Sorry, I don't want to risk the recording. Just want to mention, Colin, I think, is now on the call. So thanks very much for joining us, and thank you once again. Excellent presentation. It was quite fascinating, and some fantastic pictures there, and extremely informative. So thank you so much for putting that together. If we're good, I'll open things up for questions. Does anybody have a question for Colin? Please speak up. And
I have one. I think I've seen one of those lichens in Frontenac Park. The one I think he called lungwort, pulmonary something or other. Anyway, I've seen it, I think on one of the Archon trails years ago, but I don't think it's there anymore. It was growing in the rocks, and it was quite a lot of it. Just a great big, just draped down the rocks. So I just wanted to let you know that it was there.
Yeah, that's interesting that that it's not there anymore. It can be it's a lovely species, really large and attractive, yeah. And it's a shame when those kind of disappear. It's actually I think that species is actually a protected species in England. It's quite a different story over there because the state of their forest is quite different, and there's not so many old forests anymore. So, but anyway, yeah, I'm not sure why it would have disappeared from where you are. You know, grazing from slugs, maybe warmer summer temperatures could have something to do with it.
Yeah, the climate change, I think, is really having an effect on a lot of the stuff in the park. I just noticed things are not there anymore. That used to be there years ago when I hiked all the time, and orchids being one of them. So there's 19 different species of orchids in Frontenac Park too. But that one lichen, the first time we saw it, it was huge. And I was with two friends, and Tom, who knows a bit about lichens, recognized it. And I know I can see it in my, I can see it as plain as day, but I can't remember exactly where it is. Because to the right of it, there was an opening and between the rock, and we went down there and into a valley just to explore it, but we didn't find anything particularly there. It's just that one big, and there was a lot of it on the rock. It was growing right down the rocks. It was really pretty.
That's lovely. Yeah, I can't wait to get back to Frontenac and have a look at the lichens there.
Yeah, there's quite a few. What's the one that grows on the rock? And I see it, it's on the Tetz mine near Clearwater. It's green unless it gets shriveled by the sun, and it's black underneath. They're kind of just big open, sort of like leaves stuck on the rock. I don't know what it is, but someone said that it only grows where the air is pure. So I was just curious because I've seen it in quite a few places, but I don't know what to call it.
You said it's fairly large?
Yes, it is. Yeah. And it's dark underneath. When you turn the sort of, they're like cup shaped. When you turn them over, and it's growing on the rock, on the bare rock, is black underneath. And I'm assuming that's for the heat to absorb the heat because the top is green. So,
yeah. Well, it might be a type of, there's a few things it could be, so I can't be too sure, but it sounds like it could be a shield lichen, maybe in the genus Xanthoparmelia. There's a nice diversity of lichens in that group. A lot of them are rock dwelling.
Yeah, I was trying to find my lichen book, but I couldn't find it because I'm in the middle of renovating the basement and everything's piled up all over the place. I do have a lichen book, and I don't know who wrote it. It's just a soft covered one. Anyway, that's all the questions I have.
Oh, good. Well, thanks for sharing.
Oh, thank you. Thanks so much. So some more questions? I see piece in the chat from Chantal, who's unfortunately just had to leave. She says it's an excellent talk, and that this will make a great Frontenac Challenge theme. So I think that that will probably be something, yes, for next year. We can certainly discuss bringing that in as a challenge theme for the the markers that are put up to show people that they have done the particular loops in the park. Anybody else has a question? Well, while I was thinking, I mean, these are fantastic photographs, and also, you know, clearly a huge range or huge number of extremely rare species. It just seems remarkable that you have the ability to find them, as it were. How do you do that? Do you follow clues? Do certain types of lichen grow together, or are you just going by the type of habitat that you've spoken about for these?
Yeah, yep. A lot of it is really being able to hone in on specific habitats. So basically, when you're out there, there's just certain things you need to be looking for. Obviously, well, maybe not obviously, but you want to look for places with high humidity, so nice swamps near large water bodies, and generally on older trees. So usually these will be large trees, large hardwoods. I'm usually drawn to large hardwoods, but they're not always large, because another good place to look is old communities. And these can have rather stunted trees, but the community itself can be old. It's just that the trees are not so large because they're in a rather waterlogged area. So there's that, you know, having an eye out for nice habitats where you need to really have a good look. And also there's indicator species. So once you're in the business for a while, you get an idea of which indicator species, when they start showing up, you realize it's time to slow down and have a hard look at the trees around you. And those are just a couple examples of how you can sniff your way to some rare lichens.
Oh, thank you. Yes, it's amazing that you've found so many. Anyone have a question? I've got
a few more. Wondering,
yes.
Since you mentioned wetlands, what about fens in particular? I'm thinking, I don't think you've been there, but there's one area well known to most people who hike in the park, the Rathkop Fen. It's quite remarkable place. I'm just wondering if there's anything that suggests a fen is any better or worse than, say, you know, like as you were mentioning, narrow gorges with wet walls and that kind of thing.
Yeah, so generally peatlands are not very good or not very diverse for lichens. There's not really much substrate for them to grow on. So fens would not be a place that's not a place I would target. I would love to go there for plants, but the lichens not so much. If you do happen to have some trees some isolated trees in a fen or next to it, then that can be great because they're right next to a pretty high humidity wetland. But in the fen itself, you generally wouldn't find much of anything there in terms of lichens.
Okay, thanks.
2 questions. One, is there any particular book you'd recommend for beginners? And the other thing is, what is the sort of common gray, very small lichen that grows all over the high, hot, dry knobs of granite in the park?
So I'll start with the, I guess, a book for beginners. Let's see. I think there's I can get back to you on that. There's a couple of really good ones that came out recently. I think probably from the New York Botanical Garden Press. I think it's called Urban Lichens, something like that. So I think it's a good pictorial guide to stuff that you'll commonly see on, street trees, places, suburban places. There's another good one called something by the name of Common Lichens of the Northeast, which personally I don't use these because I'm a little beyond that, but I can definitely get you the names of these books, and they're really nice to get started with. A good one for definitely a good one for beginners and experts even, that I could recommend is The Macro Lichens of New England. This is a nice hardcover book by James Hines and Patricia Hines, and it's just beautifully illustrated, and it has a lot of keys and illustrations, and it shows all sorts of lichens that you'll encounter, really applicable to Ontario as well. So I can really recommend that one. As for you said it was gray lichens on the tops of granitic boulders in the park?
Yes, anywhere you come to a granite rock, it'll have a lot of something over it that I would assume is like a growth.
Well, there's a lot of lichens that could be on there.
But it's not a moist setting. It's a very dry, hot setting.
Yes. No, there's still, I think, quite a few species that could be there. So I'm not. There's definitely a few possibilities.
Thank you.
Yeah, sorry not to be able to narrow it down.
Thank you.
How do they survive? They need water? So is that it just from the rains they sort of sprout then, and then just they're able to tolerate the drought conditions on the high rocks?
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, it depends on just how dry they are. They might not be entirely desiccated on tops of rocks. It depends. You may have a certain very dry rocks in mind, but a lot of rocks that you can encounter, especially shaded ones, those can retain moisture for quite a bit.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thanks. Yes, I was wondering, do they actually compete with each other, or do they sort of get along? Different species, say. You see these growing together like in the picture here, but they don't tend to grow through each other. So yeah.
That's a great question. I think that's something I would love to illustrate with some more photos. I actually do like to take photos of that when I notice it in the field. Lichens do compete with each other, and it happens over a much longer time scale than competition in the animal world or anything like that. But it can be really interesting to see some lichens growing on top of each other, getting smothered by others. Sometimes you even have more or less parasitic lichens that will grow directly on other lichens, and that's how some species get their start. A spore will land on another lichen, and they'll get started, overtake it, and then grow onto the substrate on its own.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
And we often find lichen and moss together, obviously, but are the sort of moss species markers for certain types of lichen, or do they tend to be a random association?
That's something I would love to learn more about. I think they tend to occupy their own niches. Mm-hmm. So in terms of tree-dwelling lichens and mosses, I don't know that there is too much association there. A friend of mine at the Nova Scotia Museum, Sean Hoy, and he's actually been doing a study of canopies of hemlock, and comparing it to the lower trunk and all sections of the trunk from the base up to the canopy. And he just compares the community of epiphytes on there. And what he was finding is that moss diversity, richness, abundance was greatest at the base of the trunk, whereas lichen richness was greatest in the canopy. So it was really neat to see that they're following their own different niches there, and that, you know, in this case, and anecdotally, what I see as well is that they're not really indicating anything for the other.
Okay, thanks.
On the other hand, though, calcareous bedrock or outcrops, like I mentioned, that can be an excellent habitat for all sorts of specialized calciphilic species. So if you are seeing, for example, like a large showy lichen on calcareous bedrock, then that could be an indicator that there's other good lichens there, and likely good rare bryophytes there as well, mosses as well.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, thanks. Sorry, one more then. I probably everybody's heard me speak about this earlier. Other times, we are contributing to what is called the International Biomonitoring Survey, which is a study of air pollution based on analysis of moss that's conducted every 5 years across the world. And for Canada, it's run from Trent University. And we basically take a small sample of moss, one of two species that they like to look at, and dry it out and send it to the university for analysis. And they're looking for heavy metals, soot, even microplastics now that are taken out of the air by the moss. I wondered, is there any equivalent analysis that's been done for lichen and the association with air pollution? We know it inhibits their growth, but do they actually serve as markers for air pollution as well?
Yeah, there have been quite a lot of studies between lichens and air pollution. I can think of one where a lot of you have probably heard of Ernie Brodo, lichenologist with the Museum of Nature. He got his start studying lichens in Long Island, New York, and just I think with his study, he was showing that the further away you got from New York City, the more diverse and abundant the lichens got. And this, of course, was related to sulfur dioxide pollution, I think. And he also showed that certain more sensitive species that were absent from New York City, if you took them from the end of Long Island and transplanted them onto trees close to New York, they kind of withered and died fairly quickly. So yeah, lichens are definitely also something that you can use to gauge air pollution or air quality. And yeah, there's been quite a lot of studies with that sort of thing.
Thank you. Thanks. Thanks so much. Okay, well, I'll just ask one more. Sorry. Things have been wondering. You mentioned that snails, slugs, and things eat lichens. Do insects eat them as well? Is there any association that way?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
I'm not sure. Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah.
Okay.
worth looking into.
Yeah, I just wondered if there's any association again with any particular types. But okay, thanks very much. Well, thanks very much again. Does anyone else have a question for Colin? Okay, it's all quiet. So, well, once again, thank you, Colin, very much. First of all, for putting together a fantastic presentation, and say the pictures are excellent, great descriptions, and most informative. And as I mentioned earlier, it looks like we'll be using lichens for our theme for the challenge for next year. But thank you again also for, I know in a difficult time, being able to join us and answer questions. That's been extremely enlightening, and so it's been great to talk to you again. So thanks very much. Yes.
My pleasure. Yeah.
It's been a great evening. Thank you. before we go, I will just switch over and mention our next lecture for people who are joining us in April. That's going to be on Wednesday, the 21st of April, 7 o'clock, same time as tonight. And Jerome McDuff will be talking on a very different subject on some of the history of the farming families of Frontenac Park. And as people know, I think Jerome gives us the historical hike every April along Big Salmon Road. And in fact, the hike will be the Saturday following this presentation. So that'll be on the 24th of April. So this evening talk will be a kind of introduction to his outdoor hike on the weekend. So thanks very much. But once again, Colin, thank you so much, and thanks everyone for joining and for your great attention and for the great questions. So I look forward to seeing you all again soon. Thank you. Excellent. I'll stop the share. I'll stop recording first. I'll stop the share. But if there's anything else anyone wants to add.